Hello, and welcome to What's My Tagline? I'm your host, Carol Flagg. Thanks for tuning in today. On this show, we put our microphone in front of a variety of industry experts to understand how marketing, social media, and PR activities influence messaging, branding, and reputation. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at hashtag What's My Tagline and follow me at Carol Flagg. My guest today is Peter Ashkenaz, Director of Content and Media for the Office of Public Affairs and Communications for the ONC. We're so glad to have him on the program today. I've known Peter for many years, just coming back off HIMSS, and great that you could find time to spend with us today, Peter.
More than happy to take part in this.
Oh, great. Peter, I think I gave you fair warning. My first question of all my guests is if you had to describe yourself as a tagline, what would it be?
I thought long and hard about it, and I think that the answer is responsive and credible health policy and health IT professional.
I like that word credible, especially I guess in today's sort of news and media environment. Credibility is everything these days, in my opinion.
Well, I've always felt that as a resource of the federal government, credibility is what is just so important. And even as a PR professional, you always want to make sure that the information that you're providing is the very best and the most credible that you possibly can share.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into healthcare, and how, of course, you ended up at the ONC.
Long and involved. I started out in El Paso, Texas, as a newspaper photographer and moved into television and worked my way around the TV studio and the TV station and did a little bit of photography for the city of El Paso, went back into TV as an assignments editor, took a move to I think many folks know as it was the Council of Governments Regional Planning Council, and interestingly took 3 years where I ran a neighborhood mediation center, and you'll see how that began to help me. From there, I actually was moved to Washington to become press secretary for our member of Congress for Texas 16th District. And in Washington, I lasted on the Hill for a little while and then made a move over to AARP. At AARP, doing media relations and was working on healthcare reform in 92, 93. So that's how I fell into healthcare. Made a couple of other changes and moves in Washington and ended up at what was then the Healthcare Financing Administration, which I was there. And as the Bush administration came into office, we changed our names, and I think many people now know it as the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. There for a number of years, took a year off to learn health insurance from the industry, and back to CMS, a year at FDA, and came over to ONC. And it gave me a great mix of health policy and to learn more and more about health IT and IT more generally. And love the move over here because it feels still like a bit of a startup and lots of work that I think is making a difference in trying to help folks figure out how to best use their technology.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. The ONC has been obviously a champion for health IT and a provider of resources to help physicians and hospitals adopt health IT for many, many years now. I'm curious, who was the first head of ONC that you worked for when you joined?
I came in when Farzad Mostashari was the national coordinator.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting time when the big push was adoption. And my goal at that point was to try and figure out how could we get the coverage of health IT in daily newspapers, because the goal was, how do you get more and more doctors to adopt? And so I kept looking for stories, and what I found is one of the greatest challenges in getting health IT out there is I've learned that health reporters cannot spell IT. IT reporters can't spell health. And therefore, we have this great cadre of health IT reporters and continue to try to find the stories that are going to translate into something that is a little bit more than, I talked to 6 doctors who hate their EHRs. And I think that as we look at health IT, as we look at press, what still makes the daily paper is the cool new toys, and now it's moved into how is data being used to help change the world of medicine. And what we're looking at still is how do we put systems in place that are going to allow data to be collected, that are going to help to improve healthcare, are going to help manage patients, and make sure that they're systems that providers are not going to complain about using. But I think I heard I think one group that we went and spoke to, somebody described health IT, especially EHRs, as the plumbing in the healthcare house. And you think about that, it's a perfect metaphor or analogy, that nobody talks about plumbing in their house until it breaks.
Right.
And that's, if it's not, we'll see all the great new stories about the cool new toilets that come out, but generally nobody's talking about the standard toilet. Not that health IT is a toilet, but you know what I mean.
Well, I do think that's really interesting. You certainly came on board the ONC right in the heart, I suppose, of the HITECH Act and the incentives provided by successfully reporting meaningful use for physicians and hospitals. And there was all this emphasis about meaningful use, which of course was a voluntary incentive program and a process. It was never really the end game. The end game, of course, was all about adoption, to get to interoperability, to get better outcomes, population health, all these things. And I think there was that time there for, probably I would say 2011 through 2015, where it just seemed everybody was perhaps hyper-focused in on the plumbing and not seeing the whole bathroom, to go with your analogy, not seeing the whole bathroom as they really needed to.
Yep. And I think, because at that time I went and I tried to reach to a bunch of hospital PR types and get them to talk about readmissions. But to make readmissions work, you either, if you were doing great on your readmission policy, it was because you had a good, strong IT system and you were able to follow patients, so the providers could figure out where the patients were going and how to treat the patients, make sure they were getting taken care of. But readmissions to hospitals had its own triggers. So we moved away from that one pretty quickly. But, looking for a way, because I wasn't trying to push tech as the story. The story was, and still is, how can tech help to improve somebody's care, or how can it help to improve somebody's health? And even now, the stories that you see are all a lot of, let's look at how the cool new toy or the cool new app is going to fix healthcare or fix a single patient's care.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, especially as we came off of HIMSS and, Google Play was exhibiting there, and of course Apple coming into the market, and that is interesting, and it is, I think, a reflection on how perhaps the EHR market and health IT market and healthcare is changing, but it's still about the big picture. HIMSS this year, I think the tagline, was the year of the patient. Of course, every year has been the year of the patient, right?
Right.
That never changes. Yeah.
Yeah, that never changes, but it's trying to figure out what are the best ways that a provider can use the data that can now be collected to target, to treat, to better manage, and even as Dr. Rucker has said, how do we know what it is that we're paying for? And we're finally in a position where we can start collecting some of that data to try to figure out what is it that the payers are paying for, and then it becomes easier to focus your attention onto what are some of the interventions that could be put into place.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's move into the heart of the conversation, which is this term media relations. And first of all, I'd like to hear, obviously we live in what I would call a more complicated media relations environment today than in the past. So I would love to know what your definition and point of view of what media relations means to you and what it means today.
What does it mean to me today? Well, media relations, I mean, that you can tell from my history, media relations used to be reaching to newspapers, TV, magazines, radio. The internet's changed all of that, and now it means trying to figure out who are the folks that are writing. I think even then, well, now and then, you still had to build personal relationships, because ultimately that's who's writing whatever it is that you're doing. So to me, media relations hasn't changed in the fact that it's all part of building relationships with the people that are covering you, with the people that are writing your stories.
And in the world of this instant news cycle and of course social media, developing that relationship, I mean, has that changed? Do you reach out and try to email people? Are you connecting with them on Twitter and sending them an instant message? Or, it's so interesting, how that used to work. I like you, am a former newspaper person, and all of that has changed, how you just connect with people to try to pitch your stories, and of course, ironically, news media outlets today, they need more content and stories than they've ever needed because of this instant cycle. And yet I wonder if it's more challenging, or perhaps it's easier. I don't know.
It's a good question. My problem is I know a lot of reporters work off of Twitter. I don't. And so the number of people that ask me to DM them on Twitter, I'm not going to end up doing a good job of following up because I don't monitor my Twitter. Mm-hmm. I know for the health IT audience, they're on Twitter quite a bit, and there's lots and lots of interaction there. I prefer doing it. I mean, one of the reasons I love going to HIMSS is not to see all the new products, but to connect with all the reporters and get to meet new reporters that are covering. There's a couple new folks that I'd never met, and I was able to introduce myself to them. More importantly, for them to get to meet me, and then I'll follow up either by phone or email, and always on my email. And I guess email tends to be my direct source of contact. I can't even remember when I spent all of my time on the telephone.
I don't think anybody can.
Yeah, I know, it's really sad.
It's sad.
I know a lot of people, want to build their close relationships through text. I don't. I mean, I even sat with one reporter at HIMSS who was taking notes on her phone, and I'm thinking, my goodness, I could never write anything that fast on my phone. So I see how it's changing, and but I'm also an old guy, so
not that old. I've met you.
old enough to know. but I understand the value, the importance of Twitter, and what Twitter has done has shown me that my reporters are not just the people that are writing stories. The reporters are now people that are sitting in meetings who don't identify themselves as reporters. They're interested stakeholders. And so it just becomes even that much more important to remain credible and responsive to make sure that what we're trying to say is the right thing.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to What's My Tagline, and my guest today is Peter Ashkenaz of the Office of Public Affairs for the ONC. So let's continue down that thread a little bit, because that is a very good point, that we have reporters, we have at HIMSS for sure with social media ambassadors, but they continue to be social media ambassadors and Health IT post HIMSS, of course. And then you have these stakeholders, and you're right. Everybody, we're all on our phones usually, for the most part, on Twitter and even on LinkedIn, sharing news, reporting news, and delivering information out to our various networks with the idea that that the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation phenomenon occurs. How do you see social media and this issue of keeping what you send out there credible? And when we obviously get press releases, information from you via email, and presumably we're sharing them in posts, and we're sharing them in our tweets and whatnot. But is that a challenge as people sort of perhaps comment or reinterpret the information that you're disseminating, especially this critical information that you send out from the ONC?
Well, I think we go through a similar process that many others PR professionals have to go through, which is making sure that we're working closely with our leadership and our subject matter experts to really be able to underline that what we're putting out is something that's of value to the audience and something that stays within the scope of what it is that we're doing. Are here in the government, we're not selling a product, but we're selling, but we're able, or we have to talk about what the policies are. And when we're putting out issues for comment, trying to make sure that we're as balanced as possible in putting information out. We have to be careful not to put a perspective on it, but instead to try to explain what it is that we're issuing. And I think we're in a different spot in that as the federal government, we always have to remain, I keep coming back to it, but we always have to remain credible.
And so as you move forward in this environment, obviously we have different heads of the ONC as we go along, and we've got Dr. Rucker right now, who's fabulous, of course. So what do you see as 2018, for example, coming down the pike here? The ONC, just remind our audience, the ONC, you guys obviously disseminate information about interoperability and about cybersecurity challenges and about federal initiatives, and of course about the overall picture of where health IT fits into healthcare delivery. That's a lot of messages, and it's important information. So when you parcel that information out, it's very, I feel like I'm babbling here, but when you parcel all the various pieces of information out, are you just sort of sending it out to everybody in the media list, or do you do some targeting, or do you even target certain social media channels, or does it start with a press release or perhaps a blog post you guys have a very robust blog feed on healthit.gov.
I kind of it because we're putting out information from the government.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to go to everybody at once.
Oh,
so
okay.
we will, because then somebody will say, if we're putting out a proposed guidance, or when we put out the Trusted Exchange Framework, if we put out a proposed or a final regulation, it affects the industry, and it needs to go out to everybody all at once. So we'll issue a news release, or depending what it is, post a blog post so that everybody has access to it all at once. We'll tweet it. We'll put it in our weekly email blast to give people awareness of that. And so we'll look at all of the vehicles that we have available to us, trying to think about what it is that we're announcing, and then what's the best vehicle to announce it. So we really have to think about those things.
Yeah, because you only I guess get one shot, especially if you're putting out to everybody at once, since you have to make sure that the messaging is 100% correct.
Correct.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left here in our conversation today. So talk a little bit about what's coming next for the ONC. What are the things you can't, obviously you want to announce it to everybody, so but I'm just saying, from a big level, what conferences that the ONC people will be speaking at, that sort of, what you can share, I suppose.
Well, you're not posting today, but tomorrow we've got our the next meeting of the High Tech Advisory Committee, the Health IT Advisory Committee. Yeah. But those are coming up monthly. We're still implementing provisions of 21st Century Cures, so we've received all the comments on the Trusted Exchange Framework that we issued back in January, and working to get something out later this year. And I think Dr. Rucker and others have talked about us issuing out proposed rules, talking about information blocking, or the exceptions to information blocking, probably later in the spring.
Oh, that's interesting.
So nothing very large is going to be coming down the pike at all. Just kidding.
Well, all of those are incredibly important initiatives in the environment that we work on. So one last question before we wrap up. You obviously were at HIMSS, arguably, I suppose, our largest conference of the year for the industry. You were at HIMSS on behalf of the ONC, delivering messaging and meeting with various groups and media. I'm curious to know, what were your takeaways, just from a personal standpoint, about this year's HIMSS? What did you think about the conference overall?
I think people are getting excited again about achieving the goal of interoperability in a way that it can actually benefit to patients. But I think now it becomes, as far along as the industry has moved, how is it actually going to come to pass? And what are we going to be able to see? The ability for people to go to from one doctor to another and not have to fill out the clipboard, but in each waiting room, and that the doctors are able to get their information. And then, are we getting closer and closer through some of the other precision medicine initiative projects where people's information is actually being able to be gathered and used in a way that's going to improve outcomes.
I was talking to a CEO of one of the largest EHR companies in the U.S., and we were talking literally about interoperability. That this is not a pie in the sky kind of thing that can be achieved. And he made this great baseball analogy and said, "Look, interoperability, we're making progress. We're in the second or third or fourth inning here. We're not looking for a lot of home runs. We've got to get this done one base hit at a time, and it is happening. And he does see it as a reality that there are stumbling blocks, but take a base hit at a time, and the industry will get there."
And that probably sounds like the easiest way to go is to do it slowly, but to make sure that it gets done right.
Right.
And my goal is to make sure that I can reach out and work with the media that are covering the stories, help to make sure that the information that we put out continues to be information that people can trust, and that I can help them do their jobs as best as I can.
Yeah. And Peter, I want to thank you so much for your time today. You have an important role in this industry, and I appreciate it.
Well, thanks. And thanks for giving me the opportunity. I hope I was helpful.
As always, you can learn more about the work of the ONC at www.healthit.gov or follow the ONC on Twitter at ONC_HealthIT. You can share your thoughts or comments on Twitter at #What'sMyTagline or visit the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Have a topic related to our show you want to hear about? Or are you an expert who'd like to be on the show? Reach out to me on Twitter at Carol Flagg or email me at carol@healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, I'm Carol Flagg, and I want to know, what's your tagline?